Welcome to the Ask Skinny podcast with a guest. I'm proud to present Tom Dennis, this time from the UK. Tom. Tom is a CEO of Serenity in Leadership. He's facilitator, speaker, consultant, change agent, and educator. Tom, please tell us more about yourself. What is your story?
I forgot to ask you how long we've got. I've had a good old journey. I often start by just saying I went to boarding school from an early age, and it's like that has formed so many of my ideas, my attitudes, and so on. So that was very formative for me, and I became a lifeguard, and then I became a trainee airline pilot, and then I was working in an engineering company, and then I threw it all in and joined the Royal Marines and spent 17 years there. They were good years, and I learned a lot. I traveled, I lived in various places. I wasn't really involved in any of the major conflicts. I think more recently, I retired in '91, and I think some of my sort of colleagues and people who followed after me have been in far more challenging and worse situations than I experienced. But I had my moments. And when I retired from the Marines, I was looking for something that could help me carry on doing what I was doing, because I'd spent a lot of my time teaching. I hadn't set out that way, but I taught at Dartmouth and I taught at Greenwich. The English versions, not the American ones. And I found a coaching organization. It was the only coaching organization in the country at the time, in the UK. Joined them. They taught me about coaching, and they taught me how to cold call. And that's where it all started. I then did a master's in the psychology of change, because I thought, well, I'm doing this coaching lark, and I ought to learn some of the theories behind what I was doing. So I did that, which was a fantastic program here in the UK. Really, what I learned there was the way they taught it was at 3 levels: individual, group, and organization. My work reflects that today. So I coach at an individual level, I facilitate and develop teams at a group level, and I change or I work with organizations to change their cultures at that organizational level. And that I think it's amazing work. If you can come across a leadership team or a CEO who really believes in what they're doing and they really want to change, you can do amazing work. You can do amazing. And also the dynamics of the masculine and the feminine, because I think the feminine is suppressed in both men and women. But I think both the masculine and the feminine that we have today are largely dysfunctional. And we need to work to bring out the functional, the healthy, whatever you like to call it, versions of the masculine and the feminine, because we need those. We really need those to get through the challenges we've got and change course. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Really a diverse background with so many different fields, with so many different first-hand experiences. Would you say that is the only way possible to develop the broader view of the world, not just focus on one task? Because most coaches just focus on one discipline or one task and one single topic that they would like to work on. And you go into broad topics like change in the companies and similar. Do you think that a diverse background is a must for consultant if they want to be successful?
I worked with a tantric yoga teacher who I deeply respect for some while, and he always described this this image of somebody who goes into a field and with a spade and digs one hole. And if you just focus on one hole, you're going to get a big hole and it's going to be very deep. If, on the other hand, you go around and you dig lots of different holes, none of them are going to be nearly as deep, but perhaps overall you'll have more effect on the vista. I have done an awful lot of things. You have a very interesting sort of profile as well. You've worked with energy in different ways and so on, and so have I. When I left the Marines, one of the first things I did was to learn Reiki, and ended up then teaching it myself for some years. And so that sense of energy I still carry with me, even if I don't. I mean, it's very rare that I'll give somebody a treatment now, unless, you know, something very special comes up. But I have that sense and that awareness. I've worked with organizational and family constellations. I'm not the greatest expert in the world, but again, I have a sense of the field and the system and how all of those affect individuals and organizations. So it's not essential to have dug lots of little holes. And, you know, sometimes you come across someone who has just been digging one hole for a long time, and they're amazing because their depth of knowledge is so great. But sometimes their vista is very narrow. And I think it's very interesting to see, for instance, in the field of trauma, which I also have studied for a long time, how the experts, if I can call them that, there's about 5 of them who all had their own study, have recently come together, and they're speaking together and separately and learning from each other. And I think that's amazing. Bessel van der Kolk, Thomas Hübel, Gabor Mate, Peter Levine, extraordinary masters in their own right, but coming together and seeing them revealing their mastery and putting that on the same playing field is fantastic. So there's strengths in both.
Okay, thank you very much. You mentioned trauma, and I would really like to get your point of view on trauma. When I'm doing coaching, I always use trauma as something that, okay, we need to acknowledge that so that we know that it exists, but we should try and to change it into something inspiring and do something with it. Because I do believe that modern science is analyzing trauma to the degree that it just becomes useless and everyone becomes a victim. What do you think on that topic?
I think perhaps we're just playing with words here, but fundamentally, I think I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
But with trauma, you're not going to get rid of it. So I think it is about acknowledging it. In some people, it's locked away in a box, and I think that can be enormously damaging for people, not least because unconsciously they expend a huge amount of energy keeping the lid on the box. And I think very often there's a level of fear that is wrapped up in that energy. So don't open the box, because if you do, you'll. I mean, I think subconsciously there's a fear of death. If we unlock that box, we'll die, or some aspect of us will die, and it's a huge power negative setup. So I think that trauma is better exposed, and actually, if you can face it in a way where you're helped and you feel safe enough to do that, to look at it and say, I was a child at that moment, that time. I mean, most trauma originates from childhood. So I think there's this way of enabling people to look through their adult eyes and see the trauma, witness it, and notice its pain. And actually, if you can get to that stage, the trauma very often loses most of its power.
Mhm.
And so it's still there, the memory is still there, but it doesn't have its potency.
Okay, I agree with that part. But how would you propose for people that have already acknowledged some trauma from their childhood to use it in their advantage? How can they turn this weakness in an opportunity?
I often say to leaders, are you very driven? And they say, yeah, I'm very driven. I'm got this purpose to. I think most entrepreneurs, most leaders, they don't get to where they are without being driven. The question is, who's doing the driving? And that floors a lot of people. And they say, "Oh, I don't know," and it's me. And that's the easy answer, but it's not the real answer. Almost always, the drive comes from an early situation or moment. So it could be that a teacher said, "You're useless. You'll never be any good." It could be a parent. It could be a dear friend. I remember just the power of words. I remember a good friend of mine telling me that I was such rubbish on the dance floor, I should never go there again. And it closed me down in terms of venturing onto a dance floor for many years, until something happened, and it wasn't someone else encouraging me. It was myself actually feeling it was okay to be me on the dance floor. Now, at that stage, what you're doing is empowering yourself through that. And it's almost like feeling the joy of being beyond those words. And you could say, well, I go to all sorts of dance things now, and I don't care what anybody else says. And that's partly because in the old days, I used to measure myself by other people's opinions.
That's really a great I'll say point, measuring ourselves by other people's opinion. And you also mentioned one thing that I really like, is that the same trauma that paralyzes you and did paralyze you for a certain part of your life was then the motivation to do something else. Is it possible that trauma is just something that we experience, and the same trauma for someone can be a complete inhibitor of any action, and this same trauma with another person or in another point in time can be a motivator for our actions? And
Yes.
Would you believe that most of entrepreneurs and high performance have some kind of trauma that they are processing, and that is why they become so successful? And in the in complete opposite to the popular belief that trauma is something that we have to work on and that is bringing us down and something like that. The difference between high performers and the regular people is just how they process their traumas.
Yeah, you're right. Trauma in one person or at one particular time the effect of that can be completely different to the same thing in another person or at a different time. Absolutely. I think the important aspect of what you're describing there is self-awareness. You know, if I go back to this conversation about drive and being driven, I think that most entrepreneurs are incredibly driven, but the unaware ones often cause a lot of damage in the way that they are driven because they're not in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old that's in the driver's seat, not the adult. Now, if you have someone who is self-aware and says, yeah, it's my 5-year-old that wants to drive the bus. But actually what I understand is that now I gently pick up the 5-year-old, put him on my knee, and I get into the driver's seat, and then we can have fun together.
Mm-hmm.
But I am aware of the anxiety and the sort of this tension that is in the 5-year-old. I have to hold him and enable him to feel safe. Now at that stage, the drive is still there, but you're harnessing it, and you are much more aware of the consequences of decisions and actions that you take, as opposed to the 5-year-old just driving the bus who is crashing into cafes and flower stalls and everything along the road because apart from anything else, he can hardly see above the steering wheel. You know, if you see that metaphor. So this is about self-awareness, I think, and really, I think it's the key skill of leadership for today and the future is for leaders to be self-aware. I mean, you could take this into the political arena and look at some of the leaders that we've seen in power in the last 10 years. An awful lot of them are extremely damaged people. And at one sense, you can look at them and see them as normally young boys. There's a couple of women in there as well. A young boy in shorts, just screaming and ranting because he was allowed to do that then, and now he has a huge amount of power, and that's enormously damaging. Totally unaware.
Okay, so what is your advice on how to build or become more self-aware? I know that was the most challenging task on my way, and it still is because I'm still working on self-awareness daily. But what would be your advice as a coach? Which tactic, which method would you recommend for a typical business person that just heard self-awareness on this podcast, and where should they start?
In English, we say horses for courses. I think that, you know, there are so many modalities out there that I think you have to experiment a little and see what works for you. I suppose that I'd start with the body. You know, there are more signals that go from the heart to the brain than from the brain to the heart. And yet we live in an incredibly cerebral world, and we ignore what the heart is telling us. I say we ignore. I think it's a very large tendency. So there are lots of ways in which you can begin to create a space where you can hear your inner wisdom. Breathing is one. Sitting quietly is another. Switching off noise. I think it's fascinating. I find this particularly in the States, but it's also in most countries. You go into someone's house and the TV is on.
Mhm.
It's just on all the time. And if it's not on, the radio's on. And it could be great, but it's noise. And all the time that that noise is on, it's very difficult for you to hear anything else because the signals and the voice and the wisdom to come from the body is very quiet. It doesn't shout. And so I think it's really important to create an environment where you can hear. And there are, as I say, there's lots and lots of ways to do that.
Thank you very much for all this advice. Is there anything else you would like our listeners to take from this interview? Any quick tip or a trade secret that you can share with us?
Well, I often say to people that the greatest gift that one human being can give to another is their full presence. So if you're on the phone or you're actually physically in the same space as each other, switch off the music. Put down the phone. Stop looking at the screen and just be with that other person. It's a remarkable experience. And I think for a lot of us, we hardly ever experience it. We hardly ever have that moment. You know, some people are quite physical and they enjoy a good hug. Most people don't, interestingly. If you look at people who hug, you'll see, particularly between men, they slap each other on the back. And all that is doing is saying, I'm really uncomfortable with this. I don't want to do it. As opposed to just putting your arms around someone and just being with them. Just feeling their presence with no agenda and no judgment. And you know, when I talk about being present for someone, I'm not talking about necessarily hugging them at all. I'm just saying just eye contact, physical proximity, and total attention on the other.
Thank you. That is a great insight. And I believe that being present and paying attention to the person that we speak in can greatly improve our personal and also business relationship. Tom, where can our listeners reach you? Where can they find more about you? I know you have also a YouTube channel. Where is the best way to reach you and get more wisdom from you?
Thank you, Peter. Yes. So I'm on LinkedIn under Tom Dennis, THOM, Dennis, DENNIS. The website is serenityinleadership.com. And if you search on YouTube, you should find it there. The theme of the videos that we have on YouTube is leading responsibly with integrity and purpose, which, as I say, it sounds quite good. We came up with it, but it's like, yeah, let's have some of that. Let's have some ethics and some responsibility and integrity. We could do with a bit of that in the world. So my email's Tom, THOM, @serenityinleadership.com. And I really welcome any sort of feedback, or if there's interest. We're just setting up an online coaching program at the moment for people who can't afford a coach. It's been subsidized by a foundation. So it's an amazing opportunity for people to join a small group and work through some of the classical issues around leadership. What does it mean, and how do I lead in difficult circumstances? So I'd love people to find out more, and as I say, if I can contribute to people in any way, I would love to do that.
Thank you. I will include links in the description below. And thank you, Tom. Thank you for being my guest today.
Peter, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for having me with you on your podcast.